Welcome to the Tea Grannies. I'm Elise.
And I'm Maria. Today we're here to chat all about the horror genre, so pour yourself a cup of tea, gird your loins, and let's get started. Did you like that?
I love that. I didn't
The only
see
problem
it
is when I say
there.
horror, it sounds like W-H-O-R-E. Horror? Horror. Like I'm saying it right.
Oh my
right?
god, you are. This is going to be the
Horror
best
genre.
episode ever.
So full disclosure, I'm a big old Brady cat, and I never read anything scary ever. I read a story in like elementary school about the girl with the green ribbon on her neck and like her head comes off or something at the end.
Okay.
And like that was kind of where I was
That was
out.
it.
I was like, you know, this isn't my genre. I'm not going to read this. And I don't even watch scary movies. And I'm just, you know, I'm not a fan personally, but it's one of those things where like I like to read the description and I like to hear about these books, but I will not read them because I won't sleep. It's just the way it is.
Valid. I mean, I am also a big scaredy cat, so I don't read a whole lot of horror either, but I do like gently spooky gothic fiction type things. So
Gothic fiction is good. I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
that
like
works for me.
Frankenstein is one of my favorite classics, or like The Haunting of Hill House, which is, you know, definitely partly horror, but mostly gothic fiction. And not like jump scare stuff, but just kind of spooky and eerie and makes you a little uncomfortable and you're not sure why. That's what I like.
Yes.
So
I can handle that. I can handle that.
I've been reading quite a bit of that for like the last couple of weeks. I read middle grade horror is where it's at because that's all I can handle.
There's nothing like super gory or gross.
It's just kind of like, eerie and creepy. It was called Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. Like she did the Winter Night, the Winter Witch trilogy. Yeah. And it's a middle grade novel. So like it's for kids, but it was great. I enjoyed it a lot. It was about a girl and she's grieving the loss of her mother and she goes on a field trip and ends up at this farm on this field trip and they're discovering the farm and stuff, and then this stuff starts to happen and it's a haunted farm and the scarecrows come alive and kidnap the entire grade 6 class and it's wild. It is wild. It was so good.
I did say, I was like, ooh, maybe I'll check that out, but then you said the scarecrows come to life and I'm like, well, maybe now I won't. That sounds like something that would freak me out.
That is the scariest part. But
well, I guess I read Goosebumps when I was a kid.
I didn't read those.
Books. Yeah, well, you were young and I am old. So I did read those. My brother was really into them and I would try to read them also to like be cool because I was always trying to do what he was doing. But yeah, then I never slept. As I previously stated, I'm a scaredy cat. So
I went through a phase in like, I want to say beginning of high school where I was like really wanting to read scarier books. So I read this one called Monster by, I think his name is Frank Peretti. It was about like a Sasquatch. But it was like scary Sasquatch. So you can take that seriously. There's that. And then shortly after that or around that time, I read like a Star Wars universe book called Death Trooper. And that was my introduction to like actual horror. It like had full on zombie stuff and the descriptions of their faces peeling off and stuff like that. So there was just one scene where this guy had a head wound and his helmet came off or something. He was chasing the main character down this passage and he looks back and it's just this vivid description of this horrifying visage. And that's all I have in my head when I think of this book. So I was like, okay, nope, I'm out. Nope. I'm done. I'm good. Nope, no more for me.
Because even when I read some thrillers, I get freaked out. Like I read Dark Places by Gillian Flynn, like after Gone Girl came out. I actually think I read Dark Places first.
Okay.
And it's actually like Gone Girl is very clever and it's a great book, but the Dark Places was more traumatizing.
Okay.
For sure. So when I finished reading that one, I had that like icky feeling. I was like, ooh, I didn't like that. And it freaked me out.
Yeah.
Like it was a good book for sure. Like, and I will recommend it. This is just me saying like, I am such a chicken shit that disturbed me. It was more like thriller. I've also read her other one called Sharp Objects. I would say both of those are more disturbing than Gone Girl, for sure.
I don't think I've read any of those.
Okay,
actually, and I do like
them.
thrillers. Like I like the darker stuff anyway. Thriller isn't quite as scary to me as horror, so I generally do better with those.
I think you'd probably like them. I mean, I guess Gone Girl's the one to start with.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen the movie either. No.
Okay, good, because the movie kind of like sets up the twist too obviously. I felt like when I read the book, I was like, no way! Like I didn't see it coming. But in the movie, I was like, well, everyone saw that coming. It's rude. It was still good though. Everybody hates Ben Affleck. Great. Good movie. And Rosamund Pike is like one of my favorites. I'm a Pride and Prejudice girly, and she plays Jane Bennett in the 2005 movie. And so I've loved her since then. So nice. She's fantastic in that. But yeah, I think maybe you read that one. I haven't read that writer's other works, but yeah, those three were enough to be like, oh, well, she's a really good writer, but maybe this isn't the genre for me.
And neither is horror.
Yeah.
So that's why we bring on an expert in the field to tell us what horror is and why people love it. And I'm really excited to share our guest with the listeners in this episode because she is lovely and she knows a whole lot more about the horror genre than I do or than we do. And it's gonna be a fun conversation. But we're gonna kick things off with our first page critique first. Elise was nowhere to be found. Elise, Elise, I yelled over and over. Elise, where are you? I groaned, tightly clutching my stomach. The hunger started to become all-consuming. I needed to find her, and fast. I searched her sleeping quarters, then mine. Nothing. With every door I burst through, I became more frantic. Where is she? This is so unlike her. How can she vanish at a time like this? As I continued my search, the dizzy spells became more intense. Grasping onto the wall for balance, I could feel the scraping, intense thirst begin to develop deep in my throat. My pace quickened to just short of a run as I dashed through the halls of the manor, passing more and more servants, none of whom I was looking for. Wait, I thought, as I halted in my tracks. I can find her another way. I gently closed my eyes as I tilted my nose to the ceiling, breathing deeply in search of a familiar scent. What I got was indeed familiar, however, not what I was in search of. The scent was sweet and warm, slightly spiced, with just a touch of vanilla and lavender. I took a long, slightly staggered breath, fighting to keep my composure, knowing it was all in vain. I leveled my head and opened my eyes, immediately fixating on the light beams delicately dancing into the hallway through the open door. My pupils dilated, and my body acted on instinct, moving toward the doorway in search of the source of this fragrant, delicious aroma. Anya, a beautiful young woman, no more than 25 years of age, with long, warm chestnut hair, with a slight curl to it that came down to her waist. She worked for my family as a launderer. I gazed at her intently as I stalked the doorframe, making sure to keep to the shadows and out of her line of sight. She bent forward slightly, loading the dryer with freshly washed clothes. She tucked her hair behind her ear, attempting to tame the unruly strand that fell into her face over and over again.
My overall thoughts on this piece was that I really loved the urgency on the first page, and I liked the little clues that were given. So I think it was a great introduction to a vampire story, and I would definitely keep reading. So that's my overall thoughts. Yeah. But I would like to see the intro without the main character's internal thoughts, like this is so unlike her, how can she vanish at a time like this, and just give us the desperate search instead. Like, we already know the main character is looking for someone, so we don't really need that line there. It takes up kind of like valuable real estate in my mind, and I think that you could push the story forward better without it. I like the use of smell. The beat where the main character describes the slightly spicy scent is really well done. And then to the instincts taking over, I think that's something I don't see that much in vampire books. Like, they always seem to have this like stone cold control, and that's not super realistic. I think the tension at the end of the first page is great. The main character has not found who they were looking for, but someone else. And now you're like, are they going to feed off this person? Do they die if they feed off this person? And it's something like, if I were reading this in the bookstore, I probably would keep reading to the next page.
I wouldn't,
so I could find out like before I even go buy it. And this is something I bring up all the time. We don't get our main character's name or anything on the first page, but it seems to be setting up quite well for someone to call the character's name on the next page is sort of what I think might happen.
Sure.
So we're going to learn it pretty early on. I don't think that that's an issue at all, but I just wanted to point out that, yes, there was no first name. Maybe more noticeable to me because I just read Rebecca and the main character is never named.
Oh, weird.
Like the point of view character. Yeah, it's very interesting. But anyway, so this was very well done. Would definitely keep reading. And I'm liking the vibes in this. It feels a little different than some of the ones I've read before. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like I would keep reading just to find out what happens to this Anya character, and do they find the other character? Yeah. And also I would say that this piece set up the tone for the genre really effectively. Like we went in completely blind with no context as to what the story is about. And my brain said vampires after the first couple of lines. When it mentioned the hunger being all consuming, I think basically I was like, is this going to be vampires? This better be vampires. And then it was. And that was confirmed not ever explicitly, but it's unavoidably true, like given the descriptions and things that were given. So that was really well done. And then the desperation in this page comes through really strongly, really well, followed by kind of like a moment of calm when the narrator closes their eyes and kind of starts trying to find this character and instead finds Anya. The use of smell is something that I really thought was well used as well. It deepens our understanding of how this character's powers work, which was a nice bit of like really subtle world building. And then my last note is just about a piece that I found was missing for me on the first page, or a hint towards it somehow, was some way to build empathy or understanding, at least for the narrator themselves. Like they're hungry, they need to feed. That's not enough for me personally. We start in the middle of the action, which is great. It's an excellent use of just tension and conflict right from the get-go, and we know enough to understand what's happening, but I just don't have much of a sense of who this main character is beyond their intense hunger, and like what are the consequences if they don't satiate that hunger, and how bad is it going to be? And obviously you don't need everything in a first page. We say that all the time, that like it's a tight space and you have to pick and choose for sure. But at this point, I'm just like, I don't really know anything about this character. Like, their name isn't on here. So are there other details that we could learn somehow? Subtle things, a line here, a line there, that would just give me a sense of connection to them beyond the who they're trying to find. Yeah, and we often talk about like a save the cat moment, or a moment where it shows the character doing something that endears us to them or makes us understand them better. Like, I don't necessarily need that, not in a first page, but just some more character voice or something to understand a bit of who they are and who we're going to be spending like the entire book with, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of get the feeling, this could be totally wrong, I get the feeling like whoever they are is a new vampire. And like does not know how this is working, and that's why they're so panicked looking for whoever they live with. And so that kind of makes me think maybe if that's true, if that can be threaded in the beginning, because I think a lot of people would be like, oh, well, now I have a little empathy for them because like they don't know what the heck is going on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, just saying something along the hunger of like, it's still so new, I don't know how to deal with it. Yeah. Or like a beat like that.
Or like how different it was from like food hunger, like from before or something, and like just something that makes us go, oh wow, like I actually have no idea how they're going to deal with this. And then takes us along for the ride a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah, that works. But yeah, all in all, we both would keep reading, so this is great. I just want to find out what happens to Anya and who this other person is, and if they find them or not. Yeah, really good work.
Again, the downside of single page, but very well done.
They'll bite us in the ass every time.
Every time.
So I am very excited to welcome our guest on the show today. We have Sky Regina out from Ontario, and she's still in Ontario. She didn't fly out for this, although that would be kind of fabulous. I know Sky from the writer's studio at Simon Fraser. That's where we originally met. I was TA, and she was studying with Eileen. And then from there, we got hired by the same company, so now we work together all the time, and it's super fun.
It's super fun.
It is. So that's all I'll say about you. You can tell the listeners more about yourself.
Thank you, Elise. Okay. So yeah, as Elise said, we work at Writer's Block Solutions together. And there I'm a writer / editor. And I also kind of do my own stuff on the side. So I do some book editing. And I'm also an author of mostly horror, like YA horror, but some other stuff too. Yes, that's basically me. I've been writing for, I don't know, long time. Like, I think like a lot of authors say like, I've been writing since I was a kid, but like, I don't know. I haven't really been. Just like I would write like really like angsty teen poetry and in my diary and stuff. But like
I think I remember you telling a story about how like you got to read your writing in class once or something, like in grade school or something. Yeah.
I convinced my 4th grade teacher to let me read like my spooky, is it a ghost or a dog story?
I love that so much.
Yeah, it was one of those cutesy ones. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't start like seriously writing and doing more like novel writing until I don't know, I'll say like 10 years ago.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes me feel a little better. I always feel like everyone says, like you said, I started writing when I was 5 and never stopped. It's like I didn't.
That's me too.
I've written 6 manuscripts, and this is the first one that I've actually queried or got published or whatever. It's like no, I've written 2 and I queried both, and this is where I'm at right now. So yeah, it hasn't been like a super long journey, but I'm really like hyper focused on it now, so it's kind of my main priority, I would say.
I'm really excited to hear more about your horror stuff today, because I think when we were doing the writer's studio together, I don't think you were writing. You weren't submitting a horror story to that group. That was was it YA?
Yeah, it was YA. Yeah, but it was more like I don't know. I felt like I had to start with like write what you know to kind of get into writing novels, and so it was kind of like semi-autobiographical and kind of like historical.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Contemporary
historical.
Yeah, contemporary historical. Exactly. It was a dual timeline and dual POV, but the horror kind of just fell into my lap. It wasn't planned.
Good.
Yeah, we kind of love that. So to kick us off, why don't you define horror as a genre for our listeners, especially because Elise and I don't read very much of it, and we're not a very good resource, but that is why you are here with us.
I guess like I can only really offer like my own definition of horror, how I see it, and to me, it's like it's anything that kind of spreads a feeling of dread through, like, and it's like a visceral reaction too. Like when I watch a horror movie or read a horror book, I want to feel that sense of dread and that tension and just anything that I guess incites a fear response. So it can be, and there's so many different subgenres of horror that like I could go on and on forever, but yeah, to me, horror is just that. It's the incitement of fear.
I think that's why I don't read it a lot. Yeah. It's like spikes my anxiety. I'm like, whoa, no, we're trying to calm that girl down.
Like we get enough anxiety from other things in life. We don't need to add to it.
I get enough dread just from my day-to-day. Got to read something to calm down.
Like every time I open my email. I don't need more dread than that thing.
My email box is a really dreadful place, but generally, but I don't know. I think like because it's anxiety is so tied to adrenaline in terms of like the physiological responses it brings up in your body. and adrenaline is something that a lot of people seek, right? And
Mhm.
anxiety is something that, you know, you generally try to avoid. So I think they're really closely linked.
Yeah.
Like it's exciting. It can be exciting and can be fun to feel scared, especially when you're not actually threatened in a real tangible way.
Mhm.
You know, like there's a safe space where, you know, if you're sitting at home reading a book, right?
Yeah.
You're cozy and you're safe in your home, but
Yeah.
your imagination can kind of go wild, and there's something really fun
That
about
makes me really curious to see like a comparison of, I don't know, brain activity in someone
Mhm.
at home reading a horror book versus like
Yeah.
I rock climb, and we end up watching a lot of videos about people that do like crazy stunts like ice climbing and things that are even more dangerous than rock climbing itself. And some of those people just like, they are so excited to like take a jump off that cliff and swing from the rope. And for me, it's like, no, I'm not jumping. Like, I'm not doing that to myself on purpose. Are you crazy? So I would be really curious to know if it's the same kind of adrenaline or like thrill-seeking mentality, or if there's a difference between them at all.
Yeah, no, I
Wow.
would be really curious too, because like I'm definitely not a scientist and I haven't done any real research on this, but I don't know. I think like it's kind of like using the analogy of the roller coaster. Like people, when you hear people on roller coasters, they're screaming and laughing. Like it's kind of happening at the same time, where you may be shrieking with fear, but you usually have a smile on your face while you're doing it, right? So it's like it's so like it's such a visceral connection. I think that's what it is for me reading horror and watching horror. It's like, oh, I it's fun to be scared.
I like that. I really like that as a definition.
So, is that what drew you into writing horror?
You know,
after starting somewhere else?
No, not really. It kind of like, it was an accident. I started my horror novel just based on the characters. So the characters came to me first, which is kind of always what happens. And when I say always, like I've only written 2 books, so it happened twice.
Hey, it's a pattern.
Well, I started my 3rd book, and it was the same thing. I always like to start with like character development, because that's kind of for me where the heart lies.
Interesting.
And that's kind of, yeah. And with the way I write, I don't necessarily plot very much. Like I'm not a heavy plotter. I'm more of a discovery writer. So if I have the characters kind of nailed down first, then I can kind of let them lead the plot, you know, and then like I kind of count on them to like lead me through it, which is kind of like, it sounds silly and kind of hokey, but it does work for me. And of course I have to go back and revise and fix things, but I don't know. I think that as a process, that's what works.
That's really cool. It sounds kind of like almost a guided discovery writing. Like you're in good company. Maria and I are both like, or I used to be more so. Now I have a gentle outline process that works for me. But that sounds almost like the character's leading it. Like you have some direction. Like, yes, this character would do this, or no, this character wouldn't do this. So if that works,
exactly.
It works.
And I find it so helpful to know, like, to understand the character's motives first, because it's if you understand what they would and wouldn't do in certain situations, then the writing kind of like the story kind of writes itself. Like not necessarily, obviously, there's a lot of work involved, but you know, it just seems to work out that way. That if I have the characters nailed down and their arcs and kind of their emotional beats, then the actual story, the plot points, like I can change those. Like those are a lot easier for me to change than the characters.
That's exactly how I feel, because I think a lot of people that get really focused on plot when they're drafting, their characters end up doing things that are out of character. And they're like, oh, I don't know how to fix that. And I was like, well, that's because your character should be first.
Right.
And then the plot's kind of second. Otherwise, you'll have them reacting in a way like that works for the plot, but it doesn't work for the character, and then they're inconsistent throughout, and that's so much harder to fix.
I think it
is a lot harder to fix. Yeah,
that's my Achilles heel in editing. That right there. My character motivations are never clear enough because I don't start with character, and by the end it's like, okay, now I have to figure out what are those motivations, and did they come clearly enough? And no, they did not. And then I have to go fix it, and it's a big job. Yeah.
I mean, and revising a book is always such a big job, but it's kind of my favorite part. I actually really don't enjoy drafting at all because it's so new, and and I'm someone who gets overwhelmed with options.
Okay.
Like with limitless options. Like if I can literally take this anywhere I want, it kind of acts as a barrier to my creativity, because it's just I just can't focus. So I need to set limitations from the beginning, or else I'll get stuck. So that's kind of what happened with the second book, that started as like kind of a genre mishmash. It wasn't focused on genre, it was focused on character, and then I was making up the story as I went along. And initially it was based on a VR game. And I realized like it just kind of wasn't working. Like I wrote 2 different drafts, and I was like, this isn't really like connecting, and I don't know how to fix this. And I realized that it's because I don't play VR games. I'm not a gamer. Like, why am I writing about something I literally know nothing about, and I don't really have a real interest in it? It's kind of silly. So
that's hilarious.
It took me 2 drafts to realize that.
Like 2 full drafts. Like how many words?
I don't even know. Like 70. Like the first draft was around 70K, and then but it wasn't a full rewrite. But I had to kind of replot the ending to make it all make sense, and it still wasn't making sense. So I didn't know how to fix it. So that's why I applied for a writing mentorship, like a mentorship program on Twitter. And I was chosen through that, and I was mentored by 2 authors who really just helped me refocus the plot and just figure out my genre. And that's when it became a horror. Because it was interesting. Like one of them sent me, I think it was like a photo of a Goosebumps, like a cover by R.L. Stine. And I was like, she's like, this is kind of like the vibe that I'm feeling for you. I like for this book. Like, does this resonate? And I'm like, yes, it does. Like not like, more of a teen version of what Goosebumps story would be, because that's more geared towards young readers. But it totally clicked, and then from there I was able to really streamline the plot and figure out, okay, now it's a paranormal horror story.
That is so wild. I've never experienced that, of like drafting something start to finish, having a beginning, middle, and end, and be like, this isn't working, and I need to change like the setting or the genre. That sounds like a huge job. Wow.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And at first I was really resistant to it, because I was like, oh my God, I've already sunk like endless hours into this project.
Yeah.
But once I kind of pivoted and figured out what I really wanted it to be, it all came together, and the revision process was kind of like the magic ingredient, and it felt right. It was like the puzzle pieces finally fit together.
That's really cool.
So I knew that I was on the right path with it.
Okay. I think that leads us into our next question here pretty well. So you didn't have horror in mind at all at when you started this draft or this story, and then eventually got there. So we'd like to know a bit more of like, what are the must-haves in a horror book, some of the tropes or reader expectations and stuff like that?
Good question. Definitely for me, must-haves are like suspense and tension. I want to be kept guessing, and I want to have a reason to keep turning the pages. And just, that sense of dread. The atmosphere has to, kind of have that sense of like, oh, like I'm uncomfortable, or it's spooky, creepy. Like for me, that element has to be in there for me to really enjoy it. And I love like the misdirection. I don't even know if you would call it a trope, but when misdirection is used, like say in like a slasher novel, I love that, because it creates such a juicy twist. So I recently read Adam Sass's new book called Your Lonely Nights Are Over, and it was pitched as Scream meets Mean Girls, and that's initially what drew me to it, because I love
Sounds
both
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very fun. So just like in Scream, I don't know if you guys have seen that movie.
I haven't. Maria has.
Yeah.
Again, I'm older than you, so yes, I have seen it. It was all the rage at one point, and I've also seen, like, was it Scary Movie? That's the spoof of Scream.
Yeah.
I think I've seen that many more times than I've seen Scream, but
I've seen both a lot.
yeah.
I grew up like watching both of them on repeat. But so in Scream, hopefully some of the readers will know what I'm talking about. Billy is the boyfriend character, and he's ruled out as the killer, not once, but twice. So it makes the reveal, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it, just, put on your earmuffs now. But he turns out to be one of the killers, and it's so satisfying. Just like, oh man, I did not see this coming. So Adam Sass kind of did the same thing in his book and used misdirection really effectively. So for me, that's like, it's not necessarily a must-have, but I really enjoy it.
But it's almost like a red herring, like,
yeah, kind of like just
genre?
like throwing people off. Like if your readers are totally thrown off and aren't expecting at all the twist that's about to come, like that's really, it's a hard thing to do and to pull off. So I really admire it. And I guess the second thing would be characters that I really root for and care about, because I think a lot of the time in horror, character development isn't necessarily a priority, because a lot of the time some of those characters are going to die. So I think like writers maybe don't want to put the effort or the work into really developing especially some of the side characters, right? They're like, okay, well, they're going to die in like, chapter 6. So, but I think it's just so much more, I don't know, effective and heart-wrenching when characters you actually really do care about and leave a mark on you end up dying, and like, especially in a gruesome way, right? So I think like character-driven horror for me is my number one love. I love when there's a lot of thought and care put into the character work.
Yeah, because I think even in the genres that we're more familiar with, like fantasy and stuff like that, the characters that you get attached to when something bad does happen to them, it is so much more devastating, and that book becomes better for it, even though you hate that it happened.
And it hurts. It like hurts you.
It hurts so good,
But
you kind of need that, I think, across all genres. But that's an interesting point. Like, that a lot of writers might be like, well, I'm gonna kill this character off, and like, I might kill off a bunch of other ones. I don't want the reader to be too mad at me, so like, I'll kind of make these ones not so detailed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like with horror, a lot of the time the importance is put more on plot and like keeping the story moving at like a really propulsive pace. But then a character gets sacrificed as a result of that. But like, if you think about any, final girl or, any main character that you are rooting for, like, just like, oh my gosh, she has to make it to the edge. She has to like survive or get the killer or whatever the story is about. That's really, it's going to make for a much more powerful experience as a reader.
Yeah, absolutely. My question, which I'm actually very interested to hear the different options here, but what subgenre do you find to be the creepiest, and and can you run us through some of them too, because we're not very familiar with them, so extra work for you here.
Yeah, so I think for me, psychological horror gets under my skin the most, because I find people to be the scariest creatures of all. Like vampires and zombies and ghosts are super fun, they're spooky. But getting into like the nitty-gritty of the human psyche can be really unsettling. And I think it's because like human monsters are so real. They walk amongst us, right? Anybody can be a monster, anybody that and that makes it so scary. But while fictional monsters only live in our imaginations, right? So as far as we know, but things seem to be shifting, with all this like alien talk.
Dun, dun, dun.
Like aliens are real, guys. What else is real? Is Bigfoot out there? Like, I don't know. But I think the creepiest kind of psychological horror, the stories center children as the villains. That's kind of like, ooh, that gets me every time. And I'm really drawn to those types of stories because I like the feeling of being scared, like I said before. So some examples be like The Push by Ashley Audrain. She's a Canadian author. That one is really creepy. It's not even a horror novel per se. I think it's more like psychological suspense. I'm not exactly sure the genre, but it's really unsettling. And Baby Teeth by Zoya Stage is another one. And
that title is creepy. Like
Baby Teeth, I know, it's perfect. And it's like exactly, it captures the whole vibe of the book so well. And I don't know if you've seen the movie, but this is adapted from a book. We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver is another
that one. Yes, but I haven't seen it or read it, but I've heard about it.
That's a tough one. It's really disturbing and dark. Oh, another one, Sharp Objects by
I was
Gillian
just going
Flynn.
to bring that up.
Oh, it's so good. I loved the book. I loved the miniseries. And yeah, it's just like, nothing beats a bad seed trope to me, because you think of children as just being innocent and pure and like, they couldn't do anything wrong, but then like these evil children committing
the end of Sharp Objects,
deeds.
I was like staring at the book like, what?
I know, my jaw hit the floor.
Yeah, so I think I agree. That's really, very creepy when children are like the
villain,
the thing. Yeah, the villain. Yeah, because I think about like my nephew, the way he says stuff, and like kids sometimes say stuff like that is creepy, but like because they're so cute and like innocent when they say it, you're like, well, I mean, that would be creepy, but thankfully you're small and cute. But like if they said that, but like with intent behind it, I'd be like, okay, running for the hills. Like,
I know, and like it's funny because you think like, oh, they're just little kids, like on a physical level, what could they possibly do? Like how much damage could they do to an adult? But like it's more just like oh, like it just makes me feel like really uncomfortable and yeah, I like, kids also like, people when kids like for instance, like in Baby Teeth, it's really interesting because the mother of this kid is like trying to tell the father like what's going on and like trying to convince him that there's something going on, like there's something wrong with their kid. And then he's just like, what are you talking about? Like so the kid shows him a totally different side of her, and it's really like this interesting push and pull and like dynamic between the mother and the daughter, who ends up being kind of an evil kid, and it kind of like the dad not believing that his daughter could be capable of anything like that, right? So it's that I love it when they it goes into that. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm going off on a tangent now, but maybe just edit this part out.
No, this is great. It's the psychological dynamic. Like you've got a kid manipulating people who are, you perceive the adults as the smarter people in the room that know more and understand what's going on better. And then, no, the kid's been playing both sides and playing them against each other, and they don't realize it. And you don't put children in a position typically in society where you think that that's even possible.
Right. And you don't give kids that much credit. like you're not, you wouldn't be able to play mental gymnastics with me, an adult. No. But actually, kids are incredibly intuitive and incredibly intelligent. And I used to work with kids, so I would spend a lot of time with them every day. And sometimes the things they would say would really astound me. Just like, wow, you have so much wisdom and depth. Like there's just so much more going on in a kid's brain that I think adults give them credit for. Yeah. So that also ties into this whole evil kid thing. It's like, oh man, maybe they are capable.
Maybe they are. Yikes. I think that again ties into our next question too. With any genre, really, I'm always interested in this. Like, where's the line between YA and adult? Because, like, how much gore can you put in and all of that is interesting. But I feel like we often don't give kids credit for what they can or can't handle. And different kids can handle different things. So it becomes a really messy question. But I guess we're wondering, like, what's the biggest difference between YA horror versus adult horror?
I mean, that is, I don't know if I can give, like, a very direct answer because I think the line is so blurred. And like you said, different kids can handle different things, and the adult gatekeepers of YA books are the ones to decide what kids can handle.
Right.
So, It's interesting because some of the YA horror that I've read recently, it's getting pretty gritty and bloody. Like there are limits, of course, but those limits it's really dependent on like the editor or the publisher that worked on the book. So I'd say the line is blurred and subjective. Like one person's threshold for gory content can differ wildly from someone else's. But I've noticed the boundaries have definitely been pushed more in some recent books compared to something older, like like the Christopher Pike books in the 90s or the Fear Street books that I grew up on. I read a couple of them recently to do some research on an article I wrote, and they're so much less subversive and like intense than I remember them being. So of course, like I read them when I was quite young, but so like reading them now, I'm just like, oh, these are so tame and like nothing like what I remember. And comparing them to some of the newer YA books, it's very different. So one that comes to mind is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. It came out a few years ago.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it did. It kind of blew up, and for good reason. It's really, really good, and the writing's incredible. But there are some pretty gruesome, like body horror imagery, especially in there. That I was like, reading it, I was like, oh wow, like I'm actually impressed that this that this made it to publication, because like it does like push the boundaries, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And Adam Cesare's Clown in a Cornfield series, it contains some pretty graphic violence as well. But personally, I've never read a YA horror that left me very scarred. Like it's like, yes, I can be like creeped out or intrigued or surprised, but there's definitely a line. It's not going to like, go into like splatterpunk territory where it's like super, super graphic. I read a novel called Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin. That one is definitely not for the faint of heart, and it pushed my own boundaries in terms of what I can handle, and it left a mark for sure. Like when I think back on it, I'm like, oh man, that was a hard one to get through. You wouldn't find that in YA, but I'd say like it's kind of simple. Like it comes down to the character, the ages of the characters, because YA will always center teen characters.
Yeah.
But some adult books have teen or even child protagonists, like Room by Emma Donoghue. It's narrated by a 5-year-old. But when you read it, you like it's definitely an adult book, because it covers, it's like a pretty gruesome situation. But the differences are so nebulous to me that like I've read so much horror in both, the YA and horror realms, and like really like, yes, of course there are differences in terms of content, like what the levels of gore, the levels of, profanity and sex and all the other things that are usually censored more in YA books. You're going to get more of an adult, or more, I guess, I don't even know what the word is, like not realistic, but just like pushing those boundaries a little bit more. Like an adult, you can pretty much get away with anything. Yeah. But anyways, I don't know. I'm just like obviously going off and on. What I'm talking about. What was the
question? Still on the question, so you're still doing good. Yeah. No, I was in a class recently. We're doing fantasy writing, but one of the topics that the prof covered during a lecture was, well, more of a discussion time. He doesn't really lecture, which is nice. Was what's the difference between adult and YA? Like what makes a book YA versus adult? And everyone seems to have a different answer to that. But I think if you're talking about from like an agent's perspective or from a publishing world's perspective, like you said, YA centers around teen characters. Adult can too, but I think YA is not going to have an adult protagonist almost ever.
Yeah, no, I don't think that ever happens, because then it wouldn't be YA anymore. Yeah. And there's been a lot of debate in like the publishing world about like, okay, well, what about those characters that are like in between? Where do we put them?
Yeah, new adult.
Like the college, new adult, like college aged kids, or adults, I guess you would say. Yeah. Like I even mess it up, kids versus adults, like people in college, let's just say that. Yeah, because they often kind of get like, that age group is either ignored in in books, or like, you know, they're pushed into YA or adult, and it's kind of, it doesn't really work a lot of the time. So I don't know. I'm a big supporter of making a new adult category, but it's apparently not. It's like not going to happen. From what I've heard.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
It's like, that's so strange to me. I feel like there's definitely a spot for it. You know, there's lots of like college aged characters and like books set in college or university and stuff, and like they totally kind of deserve their own, because that's a total, like when you talk about like YA to adult, like even when you're growing up as a teenager into an adult, there are those like transitional years. And I think like that's what new adults should be.
And you learn a lot in those years. That's like a different coming of age, I think.
It is. Yeah. Yes.
Definitely, like to honor that time in your life, even if you don't go to college, right? Because a lot of you know, some people don't end up going to college or university. So to honor that, like that transitional period where you're learning how to adult. Is like
18 to 25. You're like, I don't know what's going on. I'm doing it. And I think that definitely deserves its own category, because you definitely step up to a certain, like a new level of like being dead inside once you hit the other side of 25. So.
When life becomes like too real and you're like, oh my God, I have to like figure out how to file my taxes. And
now I am the adultier adult. Ew.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So we'll change tracks a little, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your publishing journey. And you somewhat recently signed with an agent for your young adult horror novel. So can you tell us about that book and about your agent? Anything else you want to share with us?
Sure. Yeah. So I signed with Lucy Hamelberg of the Hamelberg Agency in, I think it was March of this year, 2023. So yeah, it is like still fairly recent. And I queried agents for about 2.5 years before she signed me. So with the first book, and then now the second book. So it was a long journey, and it definitely like took a toll. It was hard. It took a toll on my heart and my soul. And I think like it's just it's really challenging to keep going through it all, because you get that imposter syndrome when all the rejections pile up, and it's hard to see through it, to like be like, okay, wait, I do want to do this. I do believe in myself.
It's brutal.
It can be really difficult, but now that I'm on the other side of it, I'm on the next phase, which is also quite difficult. But yeah, the novel, it's called A Case of the Morbs, and that's like the 6th title. That's hopefully the final one, but you never know. And it's considered, we call it paranormal horror. And it's basically about a loner teen girl who finds a pair of VR goggles that she discovers can see into the spirit realm. So when she wears them, she can see ghosts. So that's kind of like the main plot, kind of like the inciting incident, right? And through this discovery, she learns that her classmate, who is not very nice, is communing with the dead and doing his evil bidding, and then shit kind of hits the fan. But I don't know, it's hard for me to describe the book, because I always think in terms of character. That's like that's how I start. That's where my heart is. And for me, the heart of the story lies in the young female friendship. That's at like the core of it. It's basically about how powerful that bond can be. And there's no romantic element, which is rare in YA, but I'm hoping that like people, whoever ends up reading it, will connect with kind of the intensity and the strength of the core friendship, and root for them just as much as they would for like a romantic relationship. Because I don't know, I gotta say, some of my most intense, rewarding relationships in my life have been with my female friends, and to celebrate that and kind of put that kind of on, what's the word I'm looking for? center it, like
Yeah. Yeah.
amplify it.
Yeah. Oh,
I would love to see more of that in fiction. Like, I'm a big romance girly. I love romance. But yeah, I would say a lot of my like very deep, very wonderful life experience have been with female friends, and I think that should definitely get more attention. I like that. I love writing friendships into my books too. There's usually, my main character usually has like a good bestie.
Yeah.
and
Besties
I
are
love
so
that.
important.
They are, yeah. And I think we should, talk more about that. I think people maybe take their friendships for granted sometimes, and they don't talk about like there's hard times and things like that. You know, romantic relationships always get the spotlight for that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to, just from like my own personal experience, like I would say that some of the most like heartbreaking breakups in my life were like friendship breakups. Like they had such a huge effect on me, and were so hurtful and so long lasting, like the effects of them, right? So I think like if people feel so strongly about certain friendships, like why aren't they spotlighted more in fiction?
Yeah. Oh,
anyways, yeah.
I love that. I'm just kind of I'm soaking this in right now, that like, we need more of that in the world. I think that's great. But your book is currently on sub, is that correct? Yeah, you're on submission.
Yeah.
So I guess, tell us a bit about that, what that's been like for you. It's known to be as grueling, if not more so, as the querying process. So my heart goes out to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is grueling. I've only been on submission for, I don't know, a month and a half or so.
Okay.
So it's fairly fresh. But I've already received 6 passes, and I think that's quite a lot in such a short span of time. I wasn't expecting that. It's kind of like pew, 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 pew. Every time I get a new email from my agent, I'm just like, oh my God. Like my stomach just dropped. And it is hard. Like it's hard because like querying, you as far as my experience goes, you don't get a lot of feedback. A lot of the responses are quite form like it's just kind of like, you can tell it's not really personalized, and which I get. Editors are very busy and they read a lot of manuscripts, so they can't take the time to give everybody feedback. And it's the same with agents, right? Like you can query 100 agents and maybe like 10 of those agents will actually give you a bit of feedback. So it's really hard to know like what the problem is, or like why they're not connecting with it. But it's so subjective that it's also like important to step back and say, okay, like maybe it's just a personal taste, or their publisher already has acquired something similar, or they just don't think it will sell well. Like it's because it's a business, right? Like it's first and foremost, it's a business, and it is about making money. So there's a myriad reasons why they would say no or pass on a certain story. But I'm trying not to trying not to lose my mind just like thinking about all the reasons it could be. And it's kind of impossible not to spiral like that. But I actually feel a little bit emotionally removed from this story now because it's been so long. Like I started writing 3 years ago, and I've kind of not worked on it steadily the whole time, but definitely, I've gotten some distance from it, I think. So that really helps. I still really believe in it and I love it, but I can see it like kind of more objectively now. It's not so closely tied to like my my deep feeling, my sensitive feelings. And it really does help to pivot and try and work on something new. Just like not only as a distraction, but to get to get excited over something different and something, but for the prospects of that new project. Because say this one doesn't work out and it doesn't sell, then it'll be really helpful to have another one ready to go in your back pocket. It's like, okay, well, how about this one? So I think like that's like the biggest takeaway from this so far has been like, okay, I just need to put my head down and focus on the next thing. So yeah, it's hard, but it helps to to have someone in my corner who believes in it as much as I do.
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference, I think, between query agents and pitching to editors. Also, she's doing it on my behalf, right? So
you're not having to do all that.
In my hands now. and you can tell, like, I don't know, every agent author relationship is different, but I've told her that I want to know everything. I want her to forward me every response that comes in, because I'm just curious and a little masochistic, I guess. So I want to see it all, and it's my first experience, so I do think it's valuable to hear, like, to see the words directly from the editors, not their mouths, but their fingertips. But like, not everybody wants that. Some authors are like, oh, nope, don't tell me anything unless it's an offer.
Interesting.
Yeah, see, I'm kind of in the middle there. Like, I'm a bit of a snoop and I like to know everything. So I'm like, ooh, I'd want to know. But then the other part of me is like, probably more peaceful if I didn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh, it's a tough call.
It is a tough call. And you kind of don't really know how you're going to feel until you're in it.
Yeah.
So I know a couple authors who have like started out wanting to know everything, and then they change their mind. They're like, nope, it's too hard. Stop doing that.
I can see that, and I support their decision.
Yeah, totally. Whatever works for you. However you can get through this process, which is, it really is hard. You got to do what you got to do.
That's so true. So stepping aside, away from genre specific question, do you have any tips for writing YA in general, or like what are common mistakes you see across all the genres in YA?
That's a good question. I think it comes back to character a lot of the time, because I'm such a character person. So I do see sometimes that there's like underdevelopment of characters and emotional arcs. It's not obviously not across the board, because like some get like just nail it. Like I know, what was the book? I can't remember it. I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. Like, that book is. I read that book when I started the writing program at SFU. It really inspired me to write my first book, and like just like the characterization and the emotional depth it had. I was like, oh my god, I want to write something like this. It just really touched me. And what was the question again? What common mistakes? And I think like, because I don't know, like I've heard this said before. I don't necessarily think it's true, because every YA reader wants something different from their reading experience, but I've heard it said that teens want to focus more on plot than character development. It's more, it's pacing is important. Like you'll lose their attention if you don't start in action right away, and like really just keep things moving at like a really propulsive pace.
Right.
So I think like that's really an important part of writing YA, is like you never want to have a bored reader. And I that's true across the board for any book. But I think like maybe with literary fiction you can get away with more experimentation, but with YA I think you really do have to keep the pace moving at a quick clip. And I don't know, I think like for me, characters always come first. So if I can connect or root for the protagonist, if I can't connect or root for them, I will lose interest pretty quickly. So I think like the biggest tip I can give is to like deep dive into your character's inner lives first before fleshing out the plot points. I think I already said that before. And another one, because I'm a 35-year-old woman writing teens. So I think like try not to include too much like super current slang, because it's constantly changing, right?
Sure.
And I think like if you try and like speak like the teens, like contemporary teens, like it'll date your book real fast,
really quick.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Like it's a hard thing to balance, because of course you want your characters to sound contemporary and realistic. So writing, realistic dialogue is really, really tough. But it is a balancing act of like using too much slang and making it like kind of like grounding it in the current time. And kind of going overboard and throwing too many, like, I don't even know, like, it's giving, or you know what
yeah, like the slang. I actually recently DNF'd a contemporary romance that was adult, because there's just too many like brand names and things being thrown around, and I was like, I don't give a shit that she's wearing Gucci shoes or whatever. Like it was everywhere in the first few chapters, and I was like, you know what, I don't need to be sold on this being contemporary. I don't need to, I already am. And it just took me right out of the story. It was so distracting, and I ended up putting it down after like 2 chapters or 3 chapters because I just couldn't do it. And slang's a bit like that too. I would say most people are pretty good about it, but I did read another contemporary romance somewhat recently that had some like slang in it, but it's already like slightly outdated slang. It's from like a few years ago,
right?
And I'm like, I remember that, but like
no one says that anymore.
Nobody says that anymore.
And it really like it becomes cringy, right? When you're reading, you're like, oh, that's not cool anymore. I think it's especially true with YA, because like teens are really, what's the word here? They can spot a faker, like really easily. But you know that, like, I don't know if you guys have seen that meme of Steve Buscemi, like with the skateboard, and he's like, how's it hanging, fellow kid?
What's up, fellow kid?
I always keep that image in my mind when I'm writing dialogue between teenagers. I'm like, oh, I really don't want it to sound like I'm a 35-year-old woman trying to be young.
I experienced this just talking to the teenagers that ride at my barn with me. I will like go to say something and I'm like, oh my God, they're going to make fun of me if I say that.
Yeah, totally.
I want to be made fun of by a bunch of teenagers that are cool.
Oh, it's brutal too. You're like, oh man, I feel so lame.
I know. I realize exactly how lame I am. And some of them are so cute. They're like, we want to grow up and be like you. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like, I only look cool because you're not catching me in my natural habitat, guys.
Yeah.
But they say the funniest things sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, I can't get away with saying that. Like,
totally. I know.
Doesn't work.
Like, I just have to like keep my mouth shut and not say anything like, how's it hanging, guys?
What's up? It's so true. Or like for me, what's been happening is like I will make a reference and they look at me blankly.
Yeah,
and I had this moment where I was like, not everybody standing here has seen Austin Powers enough to quote it. Like that's wrong generation.
It's especially sad when you like reference something that you think is universal, but kids or the youth of today is just like, what? Like, what even is that? like a CD or something is like CD. Like I have like like a cool like table that is like has like a mosaic of discs. Is that what you're talking about? Like been repurposed because they're so obsolete. It's a really like easy trap to fall into when you're writing YA. It's like I actually found it really helpful. I had one of my cousins she was 16 at the time, but I had her beta read my first book, and she was really helpful in kind of pointing out things that sounded like kind of authentic to teens now, and saying like, I don't think this is gonna work. So I would say like if you're writing YA, definitely try and get at least one teenager to read your book and give you some feedback.
That is such good advice. That will probably save a lot of books.
Yeah, and it can be really painful, so just like be careful. Watch your heart.
Gird your loins.
Yeah.
Get some distance.
They're honest. They're gonna be honest, which is what you need sometimes.
Yeah,
they're bluntly honest.
Blunt, direct feedback. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what you need in a good feedback person. So
it's true. Yeah.
It hurts so good.
Yeah.
All right. Next question here is, I find it a fun one. It can be painful, but it's a fun one. What are some of your favorite horror books in YA or adult or any other category?
Yeah, fun and painful's right, because it's so hard to narrow it down. Okay, so immediately what I'm thinking of is Daphne by Josh Malerman. Oh man, that one is so creepy. I read that one actually last October, and it was just like the perfect spooky season read. And there's like this Kiss, like, you know, the band Kiss, homage, because, and so I love that because I'm a pretty big fan of them. And it leans more into like, I don't know, like urban legend kind of stuff. Like
fun.
it's really, it kind of like reinvents that, the whole urban legend thing. It's also, you know, has some coming of age elements, which I always love.
Yeah.
So that one is a really, really great one. And one that's just, I always think about when I give recommendations. Another one I love is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, which is more it's very campy, as like the title probably gives hints at, but yeah, it leans more into like horror comedy, which is, I think, my biggest genre mash, or like my most loved genre mashup. It has a lot of fun with like Satanic Panic from the 80s. It's set in the 80s. And it's adult, but it centers on a teen friendship between two girls. It's written by a man, and he just nails it. Like, I don't know how he did it.
Wow.
So there are like, the themes are, you know, pretty YA, but it is an adult book. See, that's one that's interesting to me, because when I read it, I was thinking like, this is like, how is this not a YA? So that one like kind of blurs the lines, I think.
Yeah.
And what else? If I'm talking about YA horror, which I guess I should, another one of my favorites is The Taking of Jake Livingston by Ryan Douglas. It's a queer YA ghost story. It's very gritty and thought-provoking, and it's an example of a YA horror that prioritizes character development in a really like, sensitive, powerful way. And it's really interesting because it showcases both the point of views of the protagonist and the antagonist, which I really love. Because you like, I love like when an antagonist is kind of humanized, like not humanized, but shown in a way that like we understand them a little bit. Like they're not just like these like, you know, characterless villains that like have no backstory or no personality. Just like, I'm just evil, okay? Like,
just
I'm
because.
Call that the
Wahaha villain. Yeah.
You don't want those.
Like, I was born bad. Bad shit.
Yes. See, I want villains to have like backstory and like trauma. So you're like, I get your motivations. Like, they're not good. But I get it.
Like you're really an unhinged person and you're doing horrible things, but like I kind of like respect you for it. I don't know if you guys have heard of Pearl. It's a movie that came out, I think it was last year, but it's really interesting because, you know, she's the main character, but it's basically like her villain origin story. And I love that type of thing where like it really explores like why she is the way she is, and how she came to kind of commit these like unspeakable acts of horror. And you're just like, wow, like I love seeing that different side to a villain. Just like adds a richness, you know.
I was going to ask, I forgot to ask this part of the question, but are any of these, or are there any others that you have on your list that are for people like us who don't really read horror, are interested in trying it, but are very afraid?
Nothing really gory.
Nothing really
gory.
Yeah. I think like, let's see. Have you ever read The Wicked Deep by Shea Ernshaw?
No.
I think it's on my list or on my shelf possibly.
Okay, yeah, it's a few years old, and I wouldn't necessarily call it horror. Like it definitely like veers more into like fantasy. It's more like a kind of like a modern day fairy tale, but it is quite dark. It's a ghost story. But I love that book. It kind of like is reminiscent of like Practical Magic, but it's a YA. And it makes sense because it's like very witchy, but the atmosphere and tone is a lot darker. Like more like a modern day fairy tale. Another one I love is House of Hollow by Krystal Sutherland. The writing is gorgeous. It's so descriptive and lyrical, and like it just like every single line. It took me a long time to read because I wanted to like etch every line into my brain forever. Like, oh wow, I can like those. Just the descriptions. Oh my god, it's just so.
I love books like that. You're like, it's so pretty. I never wanted
So
to
pretty.
end, but
it's also like it's pretty in a really dark way too, like because
Mhm.
it's a horror and it's so intriguing and eerie and strange. And but I also love that the core relationship focuses on three sisters, because that's also like you kind of in line with like friendship stories, right, between females. So powerful, the bond there. It's nice to switch it up sometimes. And a classic that's creepy but not gory is Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle.
Oh, okay.
That one's like a little short. It's short and like I think I read it in a day and a half or something. It was, I just like inhaled it. And it has like maybe one of my favorite main characters of all time.
Okay.
She is so interesting and funny and morbid. And I've read that she was actually supposed to be autistic. Like, I don't think it was ever actually stated like in the book at any time, but I think Shirley Jackson intended for her to be autistic. And she is just so, I just love her. I think her name's Maricat, the main character, but she's a young teenager, maybe 14. And just reading a whole book from her perspective was like a really delightful experience, and definitely recommend that one if you haven't read it.
I usually recommend The Haunting of Hill House by the same author, but that's the only one of hers that I've read. So
well, you should definitely read.
I will pick up this.
I've Always Lived in the Castle. Yeah. I think you'd like it if you liked Hill House.
I did.
Okay. I think all of those are now on my TBR, which is massive and is
it grows every day.
It does. It really does.
You know, it's gotten so bad because I recently have bought so many books in the last like couple of months, like just a couple at a time, and now all of a sudden my end table has like 2 piles that are like 15 books high, and I'm like, these are all new and I haven't touched any of them.
Wow.
We just don't have enough time to read as much as we would like, you know, like how are you supposed to read 6 books a week when you have a full-time job and other responsibilities? Like,
and you're trying to write books as well. I mean, we can only
come on.
Yeah,
you can only do so much.
I should be nicer to myself. That's I'm working on that in general.
I wish though, like we could just like not have to work and just read as much as we wanted. Like that would be an ideal life situation.
That would be perfect. The other day it was like pouring rain out, and it was like kind of chilly. It was like really dark and windy, and I was like, oh, I have to go to the office. Like, why can't I just stay home and read? It's a perfect day for it.
Yeah,
but
just,
no,
like light a candle. And, like get in your cozies and with a blanket and like obviously some tea. And just like make
that's the ideal night. Ideal. Yeah.
So good.
That's like after this anyway. I don't do that every night.
Friday night plan.
I don't socialize in the evenings. Anyways, so you already mentioned that you really like a comedy sort of mashup. What other genres do you think mix really well with horror in your opinion, and what are your favorite and any recommendations?
Well, it's hard for me to like even think past horror comedy because it's so perfect. Like they just like live together in my brain. They go hand in hand. But what other mashups can I think of here? Let me see. I mean, I already said like psychological horror. That one is like I've already talked at length about that one, so I won't go into that one. Anything paranormal, I really enjoy. So and also paranormal is really tough to define because I try to come up with like a definitive definition when I was trying to pitch my book, and it's like there's like so many different types of definitions. Like, what does it actually mean? So what's the difference between paranormal and supernatural? I still don't know.
Okay.
But anything with like any sort of monster, witch, ghost, anything with vampires, like that sort of thing. I think that's always really fun. And like demonic possession, I think is a really interesting one. That also is really scary to me because I think that also blurs the line between like reality and fantasy a little bit. It's like too close to maybe being possible. And let's see. I don't know. Can you guys think of any that you like? I know you don't really like horror.
Well, I mean, like,
I know that's me. I'm like, I don't
even
know.
even if you just mash like your favorite genre, like our favorite genres with it, sci-fi horror or fantasy horror, that would be interesting to me.
Gothic horror is really a really
Yes.
good one because there's so much like atmosphere and like, I don't know. I just like has such a clear vision when I think of Gothic horror, like what it looks like. Just like, like the creaking doors and like, like a graveyard at night.
Yep.
A mansion. Like, I don't know,
Lots of
creaking
fog and mist,
of
and
fog.
it's probably raining, and
Probably, definitely raining. Yeah.
That
And
all sounds like so cozy though.
yeah, but there's a ghost
but there's
in the
a
closet.
ghost, and it's trying to eat you.
Or it's like sending you like cryptic messages that you have to decode, like before time runs out or whatever. Like, like I think of like kind of like the old school Gothic horror, like Frankenstein, something like that, where like it's the classic monsters, like Universal monsters with Dracula, all those guys. I really enjoy that as well.
Right.
Our last question, I guess, to wrap things up. Do you have any other projects on the go right now, and will you be pitching them to your current agent?
Yes. Okay. Well, I've had 2 projects on the go, but one of them was kind of like a YA contemporary rom-com sort of thing, and one is a horror. And I was like, well, I should probably focus on the horror for now because apparently authors need a brand. They need to stick to it. So just just to benefit myself in the future, I think I should focus more on the horror. But I'm working on, I think I'm like just over 10,000 words into this one, still very early days, but it basically was inspired by a nightmare I once had where
Fun.
I was at a sleepover party and we rented a video because that's what we used to do back in the day. We'd go to the video store and rent a VHS or 2, and they usually were scary. And so we rented a video, and you put the video in, and then all of a sudden, the monsters from the video come out of
the TV.
The TV. And it's like a whole thing.
That sounds awesome.
It's been done before. I know it's been done, like that's something similar. Like I watched like this like really schlocky old like zombie movie from the 80s, and it's I forget what it's called, but it was very silly. But basically like zombies come out of the TV, and like the people have to hide from them and fight them off and stuff. But this one, like I'm gonna try and kind of put my own spin on it and have fun with it. It'll be hopefully a fun, lighthearted project that doesn't have so much baggage, emotional baggage and trauma, but like somehow that always just creeps in. So we'll see.
Yep. Oh, yes.
You just unlocked like a core memory of mine of watching going to the movie store with my friends at someone else's sleepover, and they wanted to watch something scary, and I didn't want to be uncool, so I was like, yeah. I'll watch something scary. And they picked this like clown killer movie.
Oh no.
And I watched I think 10 minutes of it, and I was just like, I was so shy and anxious as a kid. Like normally I would just tough stuff out, but I was like, guys, I can't watch this.
Yeah. I don't care about being cool anymore. I can't do this.
I don't care anymore. And honestly, sometimes the scenes from it still pop into my head, and I only watched like 10 minutes of it.
Yeah,
and it was
honestly,
it was terrifying to me.
Don't get over those like formative horror movie watching experience.
Yeah.
They can really like scar you.
Yeah.
So that's really commendable that you would be like, hey, I'm gonna advocate for myself and my needs right now, even though I really want to be cool with these other girls. Because like I feel like I would be the one to be like, it's fine.
I would be that person. Oh my goodness.
People pleasing problems, right? But it was to the point where I was like, I can't watch this, because if I do watch this, I am gonna have to call my mom to come pick me up, and then I'll be the uncool one that I had to go home because she was scared from the movie. So I was like, it's a lesser evil to confess. But it was one of those things, like once I did it, most of them were like, oh my gosh, yeah, same.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. Like let's watch like a rom-com instead. Okay.
Yep. I don't think I was trying to remember if I have any stories like that from when I was a kid, but no, it was from when I was an adult, so that's kind of worse.
Well,
at the theater.
as an adult.
Have you watched Annihilation with Natalie Portman? It's
Yeah,
a psychological
it's so good.
thriller, right? And I still, like, every once in a while, if I hear the song, it just, like, even the like first few notes, I identify it immediately. I know it's that song. I know what it's from. I know what scene it is. And it's in my head. I'm like, I can't get it out, and I'm going to die right now. Right now, I am going to die. That thing that eats out your throat and, like, takes your scream and uses it, that thing is coming after me right now. And that lives in my brain all the time. It's terrifying.
Yeah. The
Okay, I think I've
power
seen
of
of that
horror.
movie from somewhere now, because I did want to originally see it, but then I was like, oh, that looks a little scary.
It is
So it's a good thing I
terrifying.
didn't.
Oh
I
my
thought it was
God.
great.
I bet you did. You're sick.
I loved it.
Oh, you're amazing.
Cozy.
It's cozy. Oh my God. That movie scarred me.
Aw. But see, like everybody has their own threshold, so
Mhm.
it really is so subjective. And what might, permanently scar one person could be like, oh, that's one of my favorite movies for another.
Yeah.
Like my friend told me recently that his mom loves I Spit on Your Grave, and I tried watching it and I had to turn it off. And like I don't know, I would say like I'm pretty like desensitized at this point because I've watched so much spooky stuff, but I couldn't get through it. I was like, this is too much for me. I'm really disturbed. I'm not enjoying myself. And I couldn't believe that he was like, yeah, she watches it like, for fun. It's one of her favorite movies. I'm like, what? How?
So what happened to her? This is her favorite movie.
It's like, what does she enjoy about this? And I kind of get it because it's a revenge movie, like a girl gets revenge on her, attackers or whatever. But like, so I get like the whole thing, like enjoying that aspect of it. But it was just it went too far for me, and I was like, no, I don't. I'm not having a good time. And as soon as it switches, like where I'm like not enjoying myself anymore, like I don't.
Yeah, you're out.
I'm out. Yeah.
No, someone tried to tell me I should watch Saw because the story was really good. And I was like, why would I ever put myself through that, even if the story was so good? Like,
yeah, true.
Just no.
Guess what? There are literally thousands of really great stories that aren't Saw. So
yeah, exactly. I'm like, I'm okay. Thank you. Like I'll just watch like Brooklyn Nine-Nine for the 100th time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know, watch like Little Miss Sunshine or something. Like just like, oh, that's a great story, but it doesn't have like any torture porn in it. So like a better choice.
Oh, man. Well, this has been a riot. This has been absolutely lovely. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been super fun to talk to you.
I had a great time.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you for having me and indulging my
yes.
Or
well, thank you for educating us because we didn't know anything and now we know some things. We're very happy about that.
Oh man, I'm honored. I could talk about this genre all day, honestly. It's really close to my heart, and I obviously have a pretty deep invested interest in it, so I really appreciate that you invited me on here to talk about it.
Awesome. Yeah, we loved it. And that's the tea on the horror genre. So don't forget to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on our socials at the Tea Grannies Podcast. Good luck with NaNoWriMo for those who are participating, and we'll see you next time. Happy writing.